Well, another day, another threat by U.S. President Donald Trump. And as you've been hearing on the news, the people of Greenland are on edge after Trump renewed his desire to control the Arctic territory. And the U.S. has not ruled out the use of military force to do it. So this is coming on the heels of the U.S. capturing Venezuelan President Nicholas Maduro. Maduro is facing charges in the U.S., including narco-tourism, conspiracy, drug trafficking, and money laundering. But Trump has admitted this is about control of Venezuela's oil. So I'm Nicole Huck, and today on Blue Sky, we'll unpack what this all means for Canada. We'll be joined by a U of R professor who has studied oil politics in Venezuela. We'll hear about what this blatant disregard for international law could mean for other countries that have resources that are appealing to Donald Trump. And we'll take you to a protest here in Saskatchewan to hear from local people who are concerned about the U.S. being involved in Venezuela. As always, we want to hear from you, dear listeners. What are your thoughts on Trump's actions this week? What do you think this means for Canada? You can call right now, 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. On Monday, dozens of people gathered at Regina City Hall to speak out against what's happening in Venezuela. After the U.S. military captured the country's leader on Saturday, President Donald Trump announced plans to put Venezuela's oil industry into the hands of American companies. Maravilla de la O was part of the Hands Off Venezuela rally.
I came out today to speak against the United States' illegal action and aggression in Venezuela over the weekend because I am shocked and outraged by the U.S.'s intervention in another country and the impact that this will have not just in Venezuela but across the continent. In particular, I'm from Mexico, and Trump has very clearly mentioned that he's also looking at intervening in Mexico in armed ways. And so if we don't stand up against this what's happening in Venezuela, any country can be next. If you are from Latin America, the history of U.S. interventionism is not one that you are unfamiliar with. It's a long, long history. Intervention in the political affairs of Latin America in general is a long-standing tradition of the United States. And so many of us who have roots in the country are just seeing red flags, seeing what's happening in Venezuela and knowing that U.S. often does not just stop there, that this is, if we allow this and do not speak out against it, that it's going to give the U.S. carte blanche to do that elsewhere in the hemisphere, elsewhere in Latin America. And that's a reality we cannot allow. Mark Carney's statements about the attack in Venezuela were very, very lukewarm. I think the international community is calling on all countries, especially countries that have some degree of influence over the U.S., Canada, to speak forcefully against any violation of international law, a violation of international sovereignty, to forcefully say we condemn this attack and to call on the United States to respect international law, and to not just say we call on all parties to respect international law, but to name the U.S. and name what they are doing as an explicit violation of international law. I just think this type of international solidarity is so important, and everyone has a role to play in ensuring that the rights of all peoples to self-determine their own future, to govern themselves, are respected.
That was Maravilla de la O at the Hands Off Venezuela rally in Regina on Monday. Our next guest has spent years studying oil and class politics in Venezuela. Kristen Chupa is an associate professor in sociology and social studies at the University of Regina. She has written on Venezuelan oil and politics and researched and lived in Venezuela. And she's with me in our Regina studio. Kristen, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thanks.
So let's just back up a little bit here. Probably a lot of people have had a crash course in Venezuelan history in the last couple of days, but for people who are maybe not as immersed in it as you are, help us understand just why Venezuela is such an important player in the world oil game.
Sure. Well, Venezuela has the highest proven oil reserves in the world, so it has 303 billion barrels of oil that we know about, which is 17% of the world's total oil. So one of the factors is just the amount of oil that it has. For the U.S., proximity to the U.S. is also a factor. And the third thing that's really important about this is that since Hugo Chavez was elected in Venezuela in 1999, there's been far less foreign oil company participation in Venezuela. So part of the reason it's such an attractive place is the potential to extract oil there and the potential for profit, and the fact that that has not been available to international oil companies in the same way. And instead, the government has focused on keeping profits in the country and using profits internally to develop the country.
What drew you to wanting to research this topic in the first place?
So I started looking at Latin American politics in about 2005, and I was interested in some of the different development initiatives that different governments were implementing at the time, and a focus on regional development. And part of that was a response to foreign intervention that had occurred in previous decades. Venezuela is an important country in that respect because it was the first country where a leader, Hugo Chavez, again, was elected, who was promoting those kinds of values. So politically, it was a leader at the time. And also because of oil and because of oil wealth, it was a financial leader in the region as well in terms of shaping politics.
So what's happened since Hugo Chavez's time? What's been happening with oil production and control in Venezuela?
There has overall been a decline in oil production. Starting in about 2013, 2014, it's progressed since that time and reduced. So at its peak, Venezuela was producing around 3.5 million barrels in a year, and that's gone down to about 1 million barrels a year right now. Some of the reasons for that decline relate to decline in prices of oil and then a difficulty in terms of upgrading how the different mechanisms of oil production. So that's part of it. There's issues with management of oil resources, and U.S. sanctions have impacted that as well.
Yeah, can you help us get a sense of the sanctions? Who's put sanctions on Venezuela and just what kind of impact that has?
Sure. So the two largest sets of U.S. sanctions against Venezuela were implemented in 2017 and 2019. And they had just to talk about the oil sector in particular, they also had a broader effect on the economy overall. But in the oil sector, the 2017 sanctions prohibited the Venezuelan government from borrowing in U.S. markets. So the government was not able to access any more credit, which again affected the ability to upgrade oil operations and resulted in a decline in production. The 2019 sanctions prohibited Venezuela from exporting oil to the U.S. So until that time, Venezuela had been exporting oil to the U.S., and that's when that stopped in 2019. So again, a major loss for Venezuela in terms of an export market.
What's Canada's relationship with Venezuela when it comes to sanctions or, I don't know, just politics in general? Canada's been involved in a couple of ways. There were sanctions implemented in early 2025 by the Canadian government, and Canada was also involved in the Lima Group in 2018, which was a group of countries that sought a change in government in Venezuela as well, calling for Maduro to resign and for Juan Guaido to become the new president of Venezuela. Which did not happen.
Right.
So Trump said American companies could come in and could get things running smoothly. What are your thoughts on that?
So right now, there's potentially some issues with that. Right now, there's only one U.S. company that is able to operate in Venezuela that has a license to operate in Venezuela, which is Chevron. Other than that, this would be a very long process because new contracts would have to be negotiated with these U.S. companies to come in. We know that production has declined a lot, and there needs to be many upgrades to oil operations, to the mechanics of it, to make it functional.
I read one story that said it could cost as much as $100 billion in investment for companies willing to put that money in for infrastructure. And the country is politically unstable right now. What do you think the likelihood is that there's companies that are willing to pony up $100 billion to operate out of Venezuela?
Mm-hmm. That's a challenge in terms of, as you say, the stability of the country and how what kind of investment climate that would create. There have still been foreign oil operations in Venezuela on a smaller scale throughout this time, so that's been maintained. So I think in the longer term, there probably would be some appetite to invest in the sector again over time, but it would take a very long time. This is certainly something that's not going to happen overnight. And some of the experts are estimating that it could take up to 10 years to actually upgrade production to be able to get oil production up to the numbers that it was before.
So I want to talk about Canada here then, because since the weekend, I've heard a lot of people talking about what this means for oil production here in Canada. Where do you think that this leaves Canada and our oil sector here?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of issues surrounding why we relate Canada and Venezuela. One is that both countries have extra heavy crude oil, so it's a similar type of oil, and Venezuela has a lot more of it. And so that's part of this comparison. The other issue is, of course, access to the U.S. market. So since the 2019 sanctions, the Canadian exports of oil to the U.S. have increased quite a bit, significantly. So I think the concern there that we're hearing is, would these decrease potentially, right? Would there be less of a market for Canadian oil in the U.S. Should the U.S. have access to Venezuelan oil? And again, I think for me, I would say that given the amount of time needed to restart Venezuelan oil production, at this point it's purely speculative. I don't think this is a concern in the immediate moment.
I want to read an excerpt from Pierre Poilievre's Facebook post. He's been posting a lot about this being a need for a moment where Canada needs to double down on our efforts for another pipeline. So he writes, Venezuela's return to global oil markets is a specific threat to Canadian oil sands petroleum in a way that Saudi oil or other light crudes are not. And we can't afford to delay any action that will protect our sovereignty and give us new customers to sell it to, especially a pipeline to the Pacific coast. He goes on, many U.S. refineries, especially on the Gulf Coast, are purpose-built to process heavy crude, a type of oil only found in Canada and Venezuela. They've invested billions in specialized equipment, including cokers, and only earn a return when fed heavy barrels. For years, many of these same refineries ran Venezuelan heavy crude until sanctions cut it off and switched to Canadian oil. In plain terms, for every barrel of Venezuelan oil produced by the U.S., 1 barrel of Canadian oil will be displaced. So how concerned should Canadians be about this? And do you feel like do you agree that this is maybe a time where we need to be thinking about pipelines and Canadian oil production?
Again, I think the timeline that it would take for oil from Venezuela, for example, for the levels to increase, for it to impact Canada, it would take a very long period of time. So I don't really see that as being a concern in the immediate moment. And oil markets change over time as well. So we never know by the time, a few years down the road, this becomes more relevant, what the price of oil is going to be, what the different trade relationships are going to be between countries. Those could change as well. So it's hard to say what will happen in the future and how the industry will develop and how relevant that will become.
And just for our listeners, we have had full shows specifically about this, talking to people also about what are some of the challenges in creating another pipeline or in Canada and why that's maybe not as easy maybe done as said. But Kristen, I really appreciate you helping us understand this a little bit better. Kristen Chupa is Associate Professor in Sociology and Social Studies at the University of Regina. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to now move to the phone lines, and our next guest is deeply invested in what's unfolding in Venezuela. Stephanie Barrios Belfleur was born in Venezuela and raised in Canada. She is a visual artist and muralist, and she's currently working on a show focused on her birth country. She's on the line now from the Papikasas Cree Nation. Stephanie, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good. It's beautiful outside. The weather's great for us today here in Saskatchewan, despite everything that's going on in the world. So
We got to find those moments of joy, right?
exactly.
What was your reaction when you learned that the U.S. had captured the president of Venezuela and his wife on the weekend?
Well, I mean, I think this is an incredibly complex conversation. I can only speak for myself. As a person who, has a Canadian perspective, not one of the United States of America, growing up here in Canada, it's very nuanced. I think it's a wonderful thing when we can be able to go in and create some support for our country, but I think the reality is that's a double-edged sword that we need to have some critical discussions and thought around. So I think for me, it was quite distressing in the context that, I have a lot of family all around the world, and, there's big, celebration, and, we're displaced people, right? And this seems like a seed of hope. But again, I think the reality is we need to sit down and really construct, well, what does this actually mean for us as Venezolanos? And I think for me, my concerns around imperialistic agendas are really distressing and red flags that are incredibly concerning, that I think we need to have deeper conversations for the long term, not just the short term, for the capture of Maduro.
Stephanie, you have family in Florida. How different is their perspective from your perspective?
This is a really hard one, and I think for a lot of Venezuelans, because as we know, it's a very large portion of us that have had to flee our country for a long time. And I think one thing for me is I try to be incredibly understanding, and we all have a difference of opinion, but I think for me, there's a line in the sand that needs to be drawn in terms of boundaries. And in the work that I do, working in the public arts sector as a public person, my responsibility is to humanity. And this is a humanities issue. My concerns for a president whose focus is on economical growth and business is not the concern of humanities. And this is something that I think for folks, our friends down south, that, again, we need to have more critical thought and conversations around what does this mean for people, and for people who are mostly marginalized. I think we've seen in the last 6 months the direct attacks towards Mexicans, and it's concerning. These narratives that are being portrayed about Latino people is something that I'm not. It's distressing. So everyone has their own opinions. We're not all of the same mind, but I think for me, like I said, my line is drawn in the sand. It's not something that I support and I don't agree with.
Stephanie, what was life like in Venezuela under Maduro?
I can't speak, from the perspective of living in Venezuela and experiencing that firsthand. I can only speak from the perspective of, my mother, who grew up under Chavez and coming here at a very young age. A lot of the things that my mom had explained to me at the time that we had come to Canada was there was large concern that it had become more distressing. And again, this is very nuanced because everyone has very different ideas about what is good for Venezuela. And I think for me, my concerns and my focuses are really on the conservation and protection of Indigenous people, our land, having the ability to, as a sovereign nation, make those decisions. We don't know the real issues of what's happening in Venezuela. And I don't think it's fair for us to interject our ideas on the corruption and a lot of the propaganda that has been placed by the United States on government. From my mouth to this conversation, I will say that I absolutely, from family members and from other Venezolanos, know that there has been a lot of injustice, silencing of folks from the regime in Venezuela. But I think from one negative to another doesn't make it good.
Stephanie, I just want to talk about Canada's response in all this. So I'm going to read some of the statement issued by Mark Carney. And he said, one of the first actions taken by Canada's new government in March 2025 was to impose additional sanctions on Nicholas Maduro's brutally oppressive and criminal regime, unequivocally condemning his grave breaches of international peace and security, gross and systematic human rights violations, and corruption. Canada has not recognized the illegitimate regime of Maduro since it stole the 2018 election. The Canadian government therefore welcomes the opportunity for freedom, democracy, peace, and prosperity for the Venezuelan people. Canada has long supported a peaceful, negotiated, and Venezuelan-led transition process that respects the democratic will of the Venezuelan people, in keeping with our long-standing commitment to uphold the rule of law, sovereignty, and human rights. Canada calls on all parties to respect international law. We stand by the Venezuelan people's sovereign right to decide and build their own future in a peaceful and democratic society. So that was the words of our Prime Minister, Mark Carney. But Stephanie, I'm wondering if, as you're looking forward the next weeks and months and years ahead, what would, in a perfect situation, what would that look like for you as new leadership takes root in Venezuela?
I think a lot of people are looking for direct answers. And, that's the one thing in having conversations with my family members who, for, like I said, a lot of us Venezolanos, this is very difficult because we're tired energetically. A lot of us, can't even go home. I last year had to travel to the border of Colombia and hoped, wished, and prayed that I could see my brother, my sister, and my father and his wife so that they could cross the border so we could have just 3 days together, because my family is not rich, right? This conversation is so complex. It's hard to give any direct answer. And I think with time, this is the problem is I don't want to say with time things are going to change, because the reality is this might not go the right way. I think ultimately, I don't think another country has the right to go into another country and take out leadership. That's just my opinion. Yeah. I think that the way that this has happened on the world stage, given the history of this particular government in the United States, it's not promising. And again, these are things that we have to have discernment about. That's a question that I don't have the answer for. And I think that's something that I need more time to process, because in the last few days, this has been quite distressing.
I imagine. Stephanie, I really appreciate you taking the time to help us give a little insight into what's going on in your own family and your own, little part of the world. So, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That's Stephanie Barros Belfleur. She was born in Venezuela and raised in Canada. She's an artist and muralist here in Saskatchewan. Today we are talking about everything that's happened over the last week when it comes to Donald Trump and the American government, Venezuela, security threats to Greenland, to Canada. It's a lot, and that's why we have some smart people standing by. We're going to go to the phone lines right away, and if you want to join the conversation, you can call 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Before we go to the phone lines, I'd like to bring in a next guest so that he can help me navigate these calls, because he knows a lot about, he's been following things very closely for a very long time. So Jeet here is a national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine. He's also taught and lectured on American history at several universities in Canada and the United States, including here at the University of Regina. And he joins us now. Jeet, welcome back to Blue Sky.
Oh, always good to be on the program.
I want to head to the phone lines right away, because there are people been waiting patiently, but I wanted to wait till I had you on the line. We're going to go to Paul in Prince Albert.
Hello.
Hi, Paul. What did you want to add to the conversation? Hey, Paul, you're on Blue Sky. What did you want to add to the conversation today?
Well, about Venezuela, it's pretty obvious to the world that Donald Trump has no regard for any law anywhere or anybody. He wants our resources, and he's willing to kill people to get what he wants. He has said he's willing to use military force to get Greenland. So he's willing to take on NATO. So basically, the difference between him and Hitler is he's got all the weapons Hitler ever dreamed of. And he's willing to destroy our economy so military force won't be necessary. But, yeah, that's pretty questionable, eh? Anyways,
Yeah, Paul, let's let Jeet weigh in here. I mean, Jeet, Paul's brought up, concerns about security. Like, what stands out to you there?
Yeah, no,
Can I say one more thing?
Trump is,
Sorry, Paul has one more thing to add, I guess.
Yeah. So about Venezuela, the reason he invaded is because they were going to sell oil to China and not sell it in American dollars. That's the same reason that Iraq, Lebanon, or Libya, and a whole bunch of other countries either got bombed or had invasions or regime change. And every one was because they were going to quit selling oil in U.S. dollars. And when that happens, their whole Ponzi scheme collapses.
Paul,
When they no longer, the U.S. dollar is the the go-to currency in the world, they're done.
okay, Paul, thank you for bringing up all those things. And Jeet, just another thing to add to the conversation there.
Paul brought up a number of points. I mean, Donald Trump has clearly articulated, and we need to be clear about this, an imperialist vision of the world. He is not saying that we're doing this. I mean, some of his people are saying it's for human rights and democracy, but Trump himself is very explicit. This is about oil. We want to take the oil. The oil belongs to the United States. And actually, Trump's one of his major advisors, Stephen Miller, went on CNN and basically said, in the real world, those who have power exercise it, and those who don't have to obey. This is like a very frightening vision of the world. And I think then it becomes an issue of what other countries do. I think both Canada, Canada and the European allies are in a very difficult position because we have path dependency. We're locked into NATO, into NORAD, and the Europeans are very reliant on the United States for their security umbrella. To me, the longer term issue is to what degree these countries can wean themselves away from the United States because it is increasingly a lawless empire. And that's something that, has to be opposed. It's going to be a very rocky and difficult road, but I mean, to me, that's like the big sort of question. Can Canada and the Europeans gain enough independence that they can start saying no? And right now, the Europeans are in a very difficult position because Trump does want Greenland. What Marco Rubio said is they're not planning on invading Greenland, but they want to make an offer. Well, that's like making the Godfather movies.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. And
I want to talk about repercussions because, if you can just go in and kidnap a president without repercussions, what's to stop other countries from doing similar things? So, do you expect the U.S. to face any repercussions for this action in Venezuela?
It depends on whether you're talking about in the short term or the long term. I mean, I think to some degree, Trump and Miller are right that the U.S. is in a position, especially in the Western Hemisphere, where it can do what it wants. I think, like in the long term, whether the United States will always be the top power is a real question. I think Paul's point about the dollar is correct. Marco Rubio has said that they think that American currency as the reserve currency of the world maybe has another 5-10 years. There's a real possibility that other currencies, we could go into a sort of multi-currency world where the U.S. doesn't have that power anymore. And a lot of these are, steps to slow down this sort of inevitable transition of the United States from a unipolar dominant nation to in a multipolar world. In some ways, I think Trump is and his people are aware of this, and they're trying to repurpose the U.S. as a regional hegemon, as dominating the Western Hemisphere, and perhaps making deals with Russia and China for the fate of the rest of the world.
I want to bring in another caller. We have Jessica on the line in Regina. Jessica, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi, thank you for having me.
What would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, I'm noticing ever since all of this had happened or started is that the Venezuelan voice seems to be missing altogether from the media. There hasn't been much talk about the atrocities that have occurred to Venezuelans under the rule of Maduro. It's all about Trump, and I understand, like, he went into a foreign country and captured their leader and their wife and took them to a foreign country to stand trial for, like, baseless charges. But throughout all of this, I haven't heard anything, or really much, just about how difficult it has been for Venezuelans under Maduro. And they are very well aware that Trump is there for the oil. But they have no help. They have no resources.
Jessica,
There's no
are you
opposition in
from
the country anymore.
Venezuela?
I was born in Venezuela. I was raised here. I have family all over Venezuela.
And what are you
And in
hearing
the
from
diaspora.
what are you hearing from family in Venezuela?
They're scared that Trump is going to turn into another Maduro, that they're dealing with another regime. But right now, the fact of the matter is that they're still under the Maduro regime. It's under Rodriguez. And they're scared. Like, they can't go out and celebrate in the streets like they would like to, because there's going to be heavy consequences for them if they go and protest against the current government. And, like, they're scared. They're frustrated. They're trying to understand what's going on. They want freedom. They want to be able to express themselves and be able to disagree with somebody without dealing with dire consequences. And
Jessica,
it just seems like with all of this, nobody is paying attention to the people of Venezuela and the diaspora.
I mean, we did just have Stephanie on the line who did speak a little bit about her own experience and her experience with her family. But I appreciate you calling in today, Jessica. And I'm wondering, I mean, we often see a kind of a power vacuum happen in a situation like this. And I'm curious, when you look to who you would like to see leading the country, if Venezuelans have their say, what would you like to see?
I'm hoping that somebody from the opposition is able to come forward and do what they can for the people. Like, it's been so long since they've had a free election. Maduro didn't win the last election. So they just want that opportunity to, I guess, like, give their voice to say, like, this is what we need. And they're not getting it. They're not getting it from anybody.
Jessica, I really appreciate you calling in today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was Jessica in Regina. Jeet, I'm curious. I mean, Jessica brought up a lot of things there, and there's questions about who is going to run the country. We have some pretty strong contenders, Nobel Peace Prize winners in the mix and whatnot. Where do you see the leadership? Is there an opportunity for there to be a democratic election that's where the results are recognized?
Well, I mean, I know Jessica raised a lot of very good points. I mean, it is a repressive regime, and I think one of the key things to understand is that what we've seen has been leadership change, not regime change. It's an external coup, and there's actually a lot of fairly plausible evidence that the Trump administration made some sort of deal with the existing regime, that they would get Maduro and his wife and leave everything else in place. And Trump, at the very start, was very dismissive of the democratic opposition of Venezuela. The Nobel Peace Prize winner, Machado, who he said was, a nice lady, but she doesn't have respect. And then it is the current, Maduro's vice president who is in charge. And as the New York Times is reporting today, the Venezuelan regime, far from moving towards democracy, has become more repressive in the wake of this, that they are, clamping down. So I think like all the evidence so far is not pointing towards a democratic transition. If there's another election and whether outside forces can go in and help to make sure that it's a free and fair election, that would be ideal. But nothing we've seen from the actions of the Trump administration indicates that that's what they want. If, as Trump said repeatedly, that the U.S. wants the oil, then and as apparently he's operating from CIA analysis that says that the current regime can provide the oil and provide the security for the oil, and that bringing in the opposition would create disruption, then one is not seeing any real chance for democracy. Which like I absolutely agree with what Jessica said. Like the Maduro regime, particularly the last few years, has been very repressive. There wasn't a need for a democratic overture, but the idea that like you could have an American-led external coup that involves a deal with the existing regime, and that will lead to democracy. I mean, I don't want to be like negative, but I just don't see how like anyone could think that that is a plausible path.
You just wrote, Trump is turning to foreign policy as an arena where he can still flex his muscles. This is especially true in the Western Hemisphere, where the United States has long enjoyed a de facto sphere of influence under the dubious justification of the Monroe Doctrine. For those who don't know, what is the Monroe Doctrine, or Donroe Doctrine?
I mean, this is actually worth clarifying because the Monroe Doctrine has actually undergone changes over time. The original Monroe Doctrine, going back to the early 19th century with President Monroe, was actually a very enlightened, progressive thing. It was like saying that the European powers should not interfere in the Western Hemisphere, and the U.S. would help protect sister republics in Latin America from European interference. Now, in the early 20th century, under President Theodore Roosevelt, he put in the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which is that the U.S. also has a right to interfere itself in these Latin American countries. And as anyone who knows history knows, in the late 19th and throughout the 20th century, there was at least 40 cases of the U.S. Sending in the Marines to change in regimes in Haiti,
40.
Nicaragua. Huh?
Did you say 40?
Yeah, 40. Yeah, at least there's
Wow.
been many cases, like where this happened. We've seen it recently in Haiti. It happened in 1990 in Panama, where George H.W. Bush deposed the Panamanian leader. So it's a very, and the Monroe, Trump now says there's it's the Monroe Doctrine, which is that, these earlier interventions in Panama, Grenada did have some ideological justification, whether it was anti-communism or pro-democracy. I think, what Donald Trump's innovation is, just to say flatly, the Western Hemisphere belongs to the United States, and that the natural resources, the rare earth minerals of Greenland, the oil of Panama, of Venezuela, belong to the United States. I think that is the what is new and innovative. It's not totally without precedent. It does sort of call to mind the frank imperialism of the 19th century of someone like Cecil Rhodes, going into South Africa to get the gold. But it's in the 21st century, if this is the model, this is a precedent. It's a very scary world because the United States will be like this. We're already seeing Putin's regime behaving like this with regard to Ukraine. It creates a precedent for China to treat its neighbors in the same way. So I think, I think most people around the world do not want this lawless world. They don't want to live in the jungle. And I think the real political challenge going forward is countries like Canada. How can we organize the world to put real sanctions and opposition to this? And part of that might require changing our national security strategy, where the main threat, where NORAD and NATO, which are all geared towards Russia, which is a problem, but we also have a threat from the United States now, and that's a very hard thing to deal with.
I want to bring in another voice, Miguel Sanchez, who was at the Hands Off Venezuela rally in Regina on Monday. Miguel is from Chile. He's a professor at the University of Regina. We had invited him to be part of the conversation today, but he's actually in transit to Chile today. So we're going to play a little bit of his tape.
I am a former political prisoner in Chile. I spent 3 years in prison before coming to Canada because the United States undertook a coup d'etat that was precisely done under the same guises that they were going to free Chile from an undemocratic government, which in fact was a democratically elected government. That's why I want to tell the people that don't fall those lies, because the United States has never been interested in the well-being of Latin America. They only want its natural resources. In our case in Chile was copper, in Venezuela is petroleum. And not only for Latin America, for Canada too, and for every country in the world. You know, what Trump has said, if there is natural resources that we want, we're going to go and take it. We don't care about the UN Charters of Rights. We don't care about any international covenant. We only are here for ourselves. And that's what is the Monroe Doctrine once again. Of course, we're going back, and what we see is definitely going back to the Middle Ages, where the strong and powerful took control of everything and didn't care about the rest. I would like to see a strong and unequivocal condemnation of the actions of the United States in Venezuela today, and that doesn't leave any space to double interpretation, and stop the quiet advices to the U.S.
Do you have thoughts on what you just heard, Jeet?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with all of it. And I think in particular, the sort of Canadian response, because I mean, we should be frank. Donald Trump has not just said he wants to take Greenland. He has repeatedly said that Canada ideally should be the 51st state. And I think that is a national security problem. And we have to organize around it. I think Canada and the European countries have tried to take the sort of road of soft persuasion. Not openly challenging the United States on this and trying to work a backdoor diplomacy. I don't see that as working. I'll have to say, Maduro himself tried that. Like, if you actually go back and look at what Maduro was saying, he was willing to give Trump everything that he wanted, including privatizing the oil industry, giving America favorable treatment. That did not save Maduro. I think the idea
what tipped the scales there then, if he was willing to kind of give Trump what he wanted, why did Trump still go in and well, now he's charged. Now he's sitting in a Brooklyn jail right now.
Yeah, because they could do it. This is a world where the strong will do what they want because they can. Miguel mentioned the Middle Ages, but in ancient Rome, it was not uncommon for the Roman Empire to capture a Briton chieftain or a Gallic chieftain and bring them to Rome and have them bow before Caesar, right? This is like a straight out naked display of power politics. Can
we talk about Greenland then? Because I mean, that's in the last couple of days, that's the kind of on headlines today, and world leaders are, European leaders are meeting today. Mark Carney is flying all over the world meeting with leaders, and I know that we have government officials heading to Greenland next week or next month. Mm-hmm. What do you make of how real is this threat, and what do you expect, or what do you think we need from the international community at this point?
I think it's a absolute real threat. I think that, through Marco Rubio, they will try to do it through coercion rather than military invasion. I don't quite foresee them doing, because it's a different thing to capture one person rather than to occupy territory. But having said that, I don't know that Denmark has the ability to resist. I don't know if the Europeans do. I think that the only way to possibly address this is to actually have draw hard sort of like consequences for the United States. One consequence would be the sort of international court to say that like any Trump administration official that's involved with this, like if they ever set foot in European soil or Canadian soil, they will be arrested as war criminals.
What would happen if Canada did that?
It would be, it would be like the end of NATO, or it would be the end of the traditional alliance
I'm
system.
not gonna lie, Jeet, I'm like really nervous right now as I'm, I was reading. Like, the more you read, I think it's a little bit nice to be a little bit ignorant at this point. But
no, I think it would be a very hard thing to do. It would require a lot of courage because, but I actually also think that all the examples that we've seen so far. All the people who try to be nice to Trump and flatter him, Machado, the Democratic opposition, was like flattering Trump, saying the election was stolen and she wanted to share her Nobel Prize with him, and she got the back of the hand. Maduro, was willing to give Trump everything he wanted. I think, maybe the alternative to try is like, let's try standing up to this, and let's actually try to say, what are the sort of penalties that one is willing to impose. And I also think, like, thinking in terms of alternative security strategies.
What does that mean, alternative security strategies?
Well, going back in Europe, there were always people in Europe, like Charles de Gaulle, who said that NATO was a mistake, that the Europeans can never, if they rely on the United States, it would be a weakness. So, reconstituting NATO to be an actual like European plus Canada force without the United States. It would take time. You have to reorient our economies and develop, your own weapon systems. But I think that would be like one possible step, like to actually have a penalty for the United States for doing this stuff, pursuing agreements, trade agreements, security agreements outside the U.S. Canada making agreements with Mexico and the Latin American countries, making agreements with Asian countries, some of which Mark Carney, to his credit, is doing. Like,
we're going to China next week, I think.
Yeah, we actually have to think about like Canada existing in a world where the United States is not automatically considered our friend, and to pursue, in that case, other friendships, other relationships.
We're coming up to the end of the show, but I want to just ask you one, I don't know, give me hope here. Jeet. I don't like ending on a negative. One
possible hope. Yeah. I actually also say this. I don't think any of this is like popular in the United States. It's popular within the MAGA base, but like even like as a military success, it was a very successful operation. But the polls show only 39% of Americans support it. I think that like within America, there's a lot of people who don't want that, and I think those are also our potential allies that we have to like be thinking about working with and supporting Americans who are opposed to this turn in their country's politics. And certainly, I don't think Canadians or Europeans want to be subservient. There's a very small minority of Canadians that want to be a 51st state. But I think the sort of one hope is like all the sort of patriotism and national unity we're seeing.
Well, Jeet, I really appreciate you giving us your brilliant mind again today. It's so well appreciated, and we're so lucky to have you in Saskatchewan. So thank you so much for that.
It's always great to be talking on this program. Thank you.
Okay. That's Jeet here. He's a national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine.